Alright, hello and welcome. This is Katarian Lightning, and we're going to be continuing on with our review of the Tenet media influencers, and now we're going to be looking at some of their videos. We're going to go and be checking it out, and then we'll go and pause and react as need be, right? And do a bit of critical analysis here, because boy, do these videos need some critical analysis. So basically, we have two videos from Benny Johnson here. So there's this one right here. This is about those attacks from the extremists in Moscow, which of course he's going to be blaming on Ukraine, and we're going to see how ridiculous that is. Then over here, this is a video that was interestingly enough shared by the TPUSA, and they like to the one they put on Twitter was the 3-minute version, which was a part of a much longer video. So I'm going to be going and showing you that media post. That I'm going to be reviewing the longer video, which is about 8 minutes. This one's about 3 minutes. Then we have a few from Lauren Chen, which will just give us an idea about what she's about, which is the Lauren Chen response to the Christ is King King controversy there. Then you have Lauren Chen and Keith Woods, which is again that Keith Woods being that major anti-Jewish new right guy on Twitter. So they're both going to be ranting about Zionism and saying that, oh, TikTok was only banned because of Zionism, etc., etc. And then we have Lauren Chen on Russophobia, and so that's going to be the final video from her. So these are all very short ones. And then we have the Tim Pool stuff, this is going to be very, this is much longer. This is a big compilation of a bunch of different videos, so I think it's got an hour and a bit that I've got, but I won't necessarily go through every single part of that. Might skip around some, but point being, I just want to go and get a whole bunch of things together. Basically, Tim Pool is their biggest influencer. Benny Johnson is, as I said, their most blatantly obvious propagandist of the bunch, and then of course we have Lauren Chen, who is the ringleader. So yeah, let's start right off here with, again, he's the one where he's going to be blaming the terror attacks in Moscow on Ukraine. So here we have, this is a good guy if you're on Twitter to follow. So Pekka Kaljami, so he's a Finnish guy who does a lot of work exposing these various different propagandists. So on the far right and far left, so the propagandist for Russia. So basically, this is his comment about it. This is literal Russian propaganda, and even most Russians laughed at this ridiculous attempt to blame the Ukrainians for the Crocus City Hall attack. Yet, according to the internet, Benny was happy to cover it on his show. All right, and the gnomes. They remarked, Benny Johnson, as requested by Lauren Chen, reported that the Moscow terror attack was possibly linked to Ukraine and the U.S. instead of ISIS. All right. So this is, Benny Johnson on his show. All right. All right.
I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm saying it is what it is.
Okay, so you'll note that, right off the bat, immediately, he's immediately, going and showing us posts from the people that he's following, right? So David Sachs, what's more, the venture capitalist who is massively in league with the Russians, right? Has financial ties to Russia. As again, one of those guys who's going to be slinging the new right, while also being that one step of separation that they need to go and claim that they're not spreading direct, Russian propaganda, as that they're being paid to do that, right? Again, Lauren Chen and these 10 media influencers are just the morons of the bunch who took the money and didn't leave that sort of degree of separation, so they don't have that sort of excuse, right? But the guys that are much more clever about things, they will leave one degree of separation between them or more, right? All right, and this is David Sachs. So the U.S. can only produce about 1,000 artillery shells per day. The Europeans even less. The Russians are producing and using around 10,000 a day. They are not producing anywhere near that many, for the record. No, the Russians don't produce that much. This is one of the reasons Ukraine is losing the war. Congressional action won't fix it. So what's more, just spreading a bunch of lies, just absolute trash. Like this isn't true, right? But anyways,
okay. The world is not sunshine and gumdrops. There are bad people, and oftentimes in war, both sides are the devil.
So right there, like again, we see what's more. Oh, both sides have, except I'm going to be propagandizing exclusively for one side. Again, this is just so that he doesn't get people to call out and say, oh, you're just a blatant Russian shill. Well, he's like literally a blatant Russian shill. He's going to occasionally throw in the disclaimer that, oh, I don't like Putin, or, oh, I don't, the Russians are as bad, or et cetera, but everything that they do, everything that they propagandize towards goes and supports only one side, and that's what you need to be focusing on.
Okay? Like, there's no angels in war. Go talk to somebody who's fought in a war and ask if you were on the side of the angels. There are...
And again, it's like, this isn't also reality. Like, there are plenty of people who do like, it's, or is it the glorious sort of thing that you sometimes see it glamorized as, but it doesn't mean that there aren't good people that do good things in war. Like, again, it's a necessary thing, so like that's how you should be viewing it from a survival perspective. It's like, so from a survival perspective, right, like for example, you could be looking at like you versus a lion, and that would be a case where it's like, yeah, there's probably no angels and devils and you versus a lion, because I mean, yeah, from your perspective, the lion trying to hunt you down, it sucks, but that gets like makes complete sense from the lion's perspective, right? So like that sort of thing, you could say that that's maybe correct, but
no angels in war.
Yeah,
there are two sides, varying degrees of evil. All right.
Once more, like what what's your definition of evil are you using, right? Like this is probably some sort of whacked out morality version of evil, like just like this pseudo, I don't even know what you would call it. Like it's not a form of morality that's been used by humanity, because again, humans recognize that they have the moral right to exist. Like this is one of the key things about morality. If you do not believe that you morally have the right to exist, like you're going to get into a ton of different trouble. But anyways,
right, I'm just saying that's why the best stance is to be anti-war,
which again, he's not, right? Like he's supporting Russia, he's supporting their propaganda, which means that he is pro the aggressor force. And remember, this is what all of these different like libertarian talking points that have moved into the new right? Like this is what they're like. It's like, oh, we're anti-war, therefore we shouldn't go and get involved in this, place where, for example, there's like a literal ethnic genocide happening, right? Which like the you go look at the perspective on LouRockwell.com about the Bosniak War, right, where the Bosnians and Serbians are fighting, and then the Serbians are committing genocidal acts against the Bosnians, and of course, LouRockwell.com is like, oh, we should not be involved, we should just let Serbia win, right? Like, that's literally their perspective. And some of them are just more blatant about why they like that, because, some of them are like, oh, we should let Serbia win because, they're the Christian country, et cetera, and it's like just ridiculous stuff, right? If that sort of morality means anything to you, like you're not going to be using it to go and justify a country that's again committing genocidal acts. And like I said, the anti-war for these people, it only seems to go and affect how they view the U.S. and the West, right? They want these countries to be isolationist, which means that you've turned over the entire rest of the world to a bunch of imperialist actions by the other players in the world. So, yeah,
the best stance is to be.
You're the one. You're. It's like if you're on it's like if you're a teacher on a playground and two kids suddenly start fighting, right? Like you should be the one to go and break it up because you're the biggest person there, you can actually go and do it. It's just so the moral thing there isn't to go and just stand idly by while they're going and fighting it out, right? Like you should actually go and intervene. And that's sort of what the Western world kind of views its place in the world as. But the West has the luxury right now of being the big player in the world. Like that won't always be the case, at least probably not, right? Because simply put, like this isn't the 19th century where there is the Europeans and the West have indisputable technological mastery such that they can go and defeat anyone else in the world, right? Like you're dealing with a situation in the world now where all the other countries are well aware of the consequences of technological stagnation. Your Indias, your Chinas, your Japans, your various different Asian countries, like all of these different, the Middle East, all these countries are now aware that they cannot allow themselves to technologically stagnate. They will not allow themselves to be subjected to that sort of place of dominance again, where they are technologically outmatched. So again, your world is not the world of the past where Europe had and the West in general had just this mastery of it. You're now in a place where you have a strong position in the world. It is not an indisputable position in the world, though. And so while you have that position of strength, while you can speak to it, you might as well go and try and shape the world as best as you can. Which again, so, because once other countries catch up, like, you're not going to, there's going to be just, equal parts at the table, right? Indeed, already now, like, if China was, for example, better managed, like, China would be, again, like the counterbalance, right? They're borderline a counterbalance, but just because the U.S. and the EU are typically aligned, well, that gives them, those are like the two out of three of the superpowers in the world, right, are basically aligned together. That means, so again, it like tips the balance in the favor of the West. But anyways,
peace at all costs in virtually every situation.
Yeah, so there you go. It's like peace is the best in virtually every situation. This is ridiculous, right? Like, this is literally the failing point of World War II, right? Where it's like, oh, we should just give Hitler whatever he wants to go and preserve peace in Europe. And meanwhile, you just give these aggressive powers whatever they want, and they'll just go and take more, right? It's exactly like, if you go and are visited by a criminal gang, right? And they're like, oh, we just want like a payout of $100. Okay, well, next month they're going to be back and they're going to want $120, and then it's going to be $140. It's going to be until you're giving them as much as you can, and they're just going to be taking, right?
Will this lead to escalation? I mean, if these people are found out to be like Ukrainian-backed terrorists, totally, yes.
What's more, so there you go. Like, accuses the Ukrainians of backing terrorism. Gets like, the Ukrainians have absolutely nothing to gain from just killing a bunch of random Russian civilians, right? The Ukrainians have been exemplar in this war in holding back on going and committing the sort of atrocities against, civilian targets. And the Russians have been enthusiastic about committing atrocities. Like, the Russians just open bomb cities. Like, they see no problem with this, right? Like, they've already dehumanized their opponents to the point where they can go and do that, whereas the Ukrainians have been going and only striking military targets, industrial targets like factories and that. And so the Ukrainians will also this winter, if the Russians insist on going and pulling the stunts where they attack the Ukrainian energy infrastructure, the Ukrainians will also go and respond in type, and they will destroy the Russian energy infrastructure, and the Russians will not be able to rebuild that nearly as easily. So, but I think the Russians will still go and push that because, again, jerk level.
The U.S. can only produce about 1,000 artillery shells per day.
Once more, this is all a lie.
Europeans even less. Russians are producing and using 10,000 a day. This is one of the reasons why Ukraine is losing the war. Congressional action won't fix this.
A reminder, the Russians were only able to use a lot of artillery shells because they purchased them from the North Koreans, and the North Koreans cannot make 10,000 artillery shells a day. So, yeah, just ridiculous stuff. And by the way, the Russians are also running out of artillery pieces to use those in, running out of trained artillery crews. Like, just the Russian artillery is one thing that's been majorly hammered, right? And it's just so. The Russians at this point, like in early 2024, they had the advantage in artillery, and the Ukrainians were basically forced to counter it using a variety of different tactics. But basically, yeah.
This. So here from the Berliner Zeitung, the U.S. knew in advance about plans to blow up the Nord Stream pipelines in the Baltic Sea.
Which a reminder is, again, it's like, the Europeans claim to be against the Russians, right? And yet they want to go and import massive amounts of oil from Russia, which is, it's very sketchy, right? Like, the different factions in Europe, these big business types, these corporations, the puppets that they put in place inside of the governments in Europe. They went and gave them complete control over the energy infrastructure of Europe, right? And so then they went and shackled Europe to Russia, all for their own selfish personal gain. Like, this is what they did, right? So, yeah, and the pipelines were destroyed. As far as who did the pipelines, like, do you think it's Ukraine? Could be. Like, it's one of the parties that could have done it. Could have been Poland. Could have been one of the Baltic states. Like, there are a bunch of people who would have wanted to covertly destroy that pipeline. But it's like,
according to Poland's foreign minister, in an interview published Friday, but the U.S. did nothing.
He's mad, right? Oh, I'm going to be mad that the energy infrastructure that Russia was using to go and fund its war efforts got sabotaged.
So, this is a terrorist attack?
No, it is not a terrorist attack. Like, see, this is the thing, right? It's like, no, like, a terrorist attack, for starters, would involve you actually going and committing an attack such that would cause terror. Like this is an attack upon your opponent's infrastructure, the vital infrastructure that they're using to fund the war. Like, this is no different than an allied bombers going and bombing out a ball bearing plant in Germany in World War II, right? It's like, you could be this, sort of middle of the quote guy to be like, oh, actually, those ball bearings, they could have been used for, civilian cars and that sort of thing. It's like, yeah, go away, just go away. Like, ridiculous stuff. And it's been successful, right? Like, the Ukrainians have been absolutely annihilating the Russian oil and gas production lines. Like, they've been attacking those facilities constantly. And it has been, remember, because that's Russia's big thing, right? Without those oil and gas facilities, like, what do they really offer the world? Like, they have other resources, like other minerals that they export, but those are a lot less in demand than the oil and gas. So if you go and destroy their oil and gas infrastructure, well, suddenly you've gone and majorly decreased their power level in the world, right? Like, the influence that they can go and wield with other countries, economically speaking. So that's one of the big things that Ukraine's been trying to do. Yeah,
this is the largest eco-terrorism and economic terrorism ever.
Again, not true. Just not true.
This is a terrorist attack that the U.S. knew about and then did nothing.
Yeah, so again, it's like just always like terrorism. And again, it's like you never see this guy here, right, go and condemn, Russia bombing maternity hospitals, or like Russia going and shooting missiles into, civilian areas, like, other hospitals, shopping malls. Like, you'll never see this type go and condemn that, because they won't want you to go and know about that. They want you to go and always think, oh, Russia's the victims in all this, right? Like, look at how mean the Ukrainians are at that. Just so, because you could only ever see from that perspective, you're going to go and fall for their propaganda.
Mike Benz, who's one of our favorite people as it...
I will note this right here, okay? This guy's going to come up again, and he's going to be cited by a number of different people, and this is very interesting, I think, because we'll get into this more when we get into the Defender section, but Mike Benz is basically a former white nationalist who's now a part of the New Right, okay? So just, like, that's what he was. Basically, his deal is that we're going to go and see him, cited by a whole bunch of different people, okay? A whole bunch of these different New Right influencers. Very, very interesting. So just knowing that Tenet Media is also bringing him up here. And he's very much one of those guys that if there's, other pockets that have been filled, like, he'll be one of those pockets, all right?
Pertains to these kind of topics of geopolitical warfare and next-gen warfare, says to the report that the U.S. State Department said, do not go to concerts in Russia.
By the way, the U.S. State Department also warned the Russians that they're like, oh yeah, you're going to have a terrorist attack in Moscow. Like, we literally picked this up with our intelligence guys, so here's a tip, you're going to have a terrorist attack in Moscow. Which, of course, they didn't do anything about because they're, again, incompetent.
Once again, targeting music concerts. If the State Department knew it, the CIA somehow had advanced awareness and provided the intelligence.
they're the intelligent gathering organization that goes and monitors these different groups. Like, yeah, they had advanced awareness because they found it out. They oftentimes don't have, advanced awareness. Like, they didn't have advanced awareness in when the those Islamists conducted the terror attack in Paris, right? That ended up with like over 100 people dead. Like, they didn't have that, which was once again targeting a music venue, right? And by the way, if you want to know why they target music venues, it's because with the Islamists, hardcore Islamists don't do music, right? They don't do like live performing music and all that. They wouldn't go and attend those sorts of concerts. So yeah, you might have like a moderate Muslim would go and attend a musical concert like that, but an Islamist would not. So basically, they can go to those places and be confident that they're not going to go and shoot any sort of fellow Islamists. They're just going to be going at worst, they're going to be shooting, moderate Muslims, which they're absolutely fine with going and killing those sorts of people, right? Like, yeah, just bad overall. And so then you see this whole conspiracy, fill in the rest yourself, right?
Intelligence and domestic paramilitary operations being planned in Moscow, fill in the rest yourself. I mean, by every measure, it looks like the United States knew that something like this was going to pop off.
Yeah, because they'd heard the Islamists talking about doing this. Like, and if they had, seriously, if they were actually the ones behind it, like, they just go and say, like, why would you even tell your opponent about this? Like, you wouldn't. You would just, you wouldn't tell your opponents about this. Yeah, and what's more, like, there's never been, again, like, there's no evidence that the U.S. does this sort of thing, right? There's a lot of evidence that Russia goes and funds these sorts of groups, and even if, like, some of these Islamists have gone out of control, like, they're funding money to these various different hardcore Islamist groups, right? Like,
at what point is there culpability? Well, I guess we're going to have to wait and see to find out who these guys were, and to find out, what the response will be with you as it pertains to Ukraine.
So just immediately, like, assertion, right? Oh, it's Ukraine, right? Just ridiculous stuff. Again, it's like Ukraine has absolutely nothing to go and gain from going and killing off, a bunch of Russian civilians. Because here's the thing, like, at very best of that, like, again, just assuming this sort of wacky world where there's this, like, immoral force that, and the Ukrainian government somehow does this sort of thing, blah, blah, blah. So what's the worst that you can do with that sort of situation? The worst thing is that you can go and make Putin look weak such that it produces popular dissatisfaction. Okay, that would be the worst outcome for the Russians. The best outcome for the Russians is that you could go and allows them to go and justify further descent into fascistic tendencies. Like, we're going to go and well, this could be used as, if you go and blame it on the West, right? Look at us, we're persecuted, we're being attacked by Western forces, join the military, right? Like, this is how the Russians use this sort of situation. Of course, as the old saying goes, like, never let crisis go to waste, right? And so that's how they're going to use their crisis. All right. Now, this is an interesting one because I'll go and get into the video here. By the way, I leave like about 6 seconds or something for the post here. But basically, here we have Turning Point USA, which again is the Charlie Kirk outfit, right? So a big player in the new right in America. This targets especially like young men and that sort of thing, particularly the youth, right? So basically, here we see them, and this is from August 11th, 2023, and they're going to go and cite Benny Johnson, who once more, Laura Chen at this point, right, affiliated with Turning Point USA. Okay, so Tenet Media, their influencers are associated with Turning Point USA, indirectly, but Turning Point USA is also going to go and be promoting them a lot. Okay, so that's very interesting. And then they're promoting again a video by Benny Johnson here, which is the 3-minute and 28 version. They got a cut down version of this post. Quote, quote, nobody wants to say it. We've gone from fighting a war on terror to funding a war on terror. Benny Johnson explains what America is really funding with its tax dollars in the war in Ukraine. All right? And you see here that in the full video, and we'll see down below, like in the full video, Benny Johnson lays out the potential consequences of the USA's... Yeah, let's just go back here. So, and then in the post below, in the full video, Benny Johnson lays out the potential consequences of the USA's, continued fighting of Ukraine. Okay, so that's what they're doing. All right, and so I'm not going to go and show you the snippet video. I'm going to go through this whole thing. So, and the video from Benny Johnson is titled "America is Funding a War of Terror in Ukraine." So, a reminder: these are the new right, these alleged conservatives. Once more, they're criticizing Ukraine, the Ukrainians, for fighting, go and preserve their country, their culture, their identity, against an invading, aggressive imperial force that explicitly wants to destroy them, absorb them into itself. They're fighting with much less equipment, typically, than the Russians have. They've been getting, slung by the Western countries, but it's oftentimes not even to the amount that the Western countries promised to them. All right, so you're having a force which is dedicated to fighting for its independence. They are fighting against a bigger foe, oftentimes with underprepared, equipment and that, right? Like, so less equipment. They're doing a good job of it. They're holding the Russians. And basically, they're getting hyper-criticized by the conservatives, these new right types, right? I should have been, not even like what you typically think of conservatives, right? Like, because those guys are almost always on the side of Ukraine, okay? But like these new right, these MAGA, these libertarian new right types, like they're just criticizing the Ukrainians nonstop and going and acting like, oh, it's all Ukraine's fault. They're promoting every single Russian talking point, and they're inverting everything. So the Ukrainians who are fighting, again, for their freedom, for their country, they suddenly become the cowards and evil ones. Again, it's like, what was conservative about calling people who are fighting for their homeland, for their freedom, was conservative about calling them cowards and evil? There's nothing conservative about that. This is new right, disgusting, mercantile thuggery, right? Where the new right just goes, oh, we're going to go and criticize Ukraine, and we're going to go and laugh at them, and it's also they call them, oh, the outpost of globalism, when the reality is that, why are you supporting Russia? Well, because you want Russia's global side, this global authoritarianism, to go, when you want to see this multipolar world of the Russians come about, right? Where there's a bunch of different imperial powers that can go and screw over all of the different countries around them. They can go and control them. They can go and rip their resources out for their rich capitalist oligarchs. Like, this is what you want. This is the world that they want to go and create. They want a world in which China and Russia can go and run rampant over Africa, and of course presumably guys like David Sachs can go and get a bunch of resources out of Africa and get their jollies off to images of African miners being shot up by the Russians that own the places. Like, this is what they want, the world that they want, okay? And what they're going to fundamentally do is just lie about all. And this is what the new right is. Like, the new right is this, again, it's like the combination of the worst elements of the left, worst elements of the right. They've gone and brought them together in a propaganda package for you. Like, just presented to you as a whole, and they're going to call it populism. Like, just ridiculous stuff, okay? Ridiculous stuff. Again, there's so many different ways, so many different better paths to go and choose than these guys, but we'll begin.
The war on terror began 22 years ago. What exactly has America achieved? Let's check the record. A ruling class lied to the world, invaded sovereign nations.
Once more, again, we have to point out, it's like you disagree with what happened in 2001, whatever, right? But the thing is that, like, again, like, are you like gonna say that Iraq is somehow a sovereign nation when it's like its entire shtick is that it wants to go and conquer its neighbors? Like it needs, again, like that strategic position of Iraq, like to be something in the world, like it needed to go and conquer Kuwait, right? Because again, like Iraq has one little port, right? Like it has this little tiny piece of coastline, and that's all it has, right? So it needed those Kuwaiti ports to go and be this major regional player, and of course it didn't end up getting those, right? So, but yeah, so they want to go and say, oh, the U.S. lied to the world, blah blah blah.
Take the fact that he develops weapons of mass destruction very seriously.
Killed hundreds of thousands of civilians and displaced millions more while spending trillions.
Okay. And note that, right? Like, they immediately go, oh, the U.S. is responsible for killing hundreds of thousands. No, the U.S. did not kill hundreds of thousands of civilians. Like, again, so the study they all want to go and cite is this one study which is like, oh, the U.S. killed 1.4 million people, right? Like, that's just literally what that one study of that stupid university went claimed, right? Like, but it's not true. Like, because they went... The only way they got those numbers was that they went and blamed literally every single death in the Middle East from literally 2001 on the U.S., right? Like, so literally the vast majority of them are happening under the watch of Assad or are being conducted by these, like, again, like the Islamists, like, or in Iraq. Like, I have to point out, like, again, the vast majority of deaths are like like those government forces that are being funded by, Iran. They're leaving, like, IEDs on the roadsides and that sort of thing. They're just, this is how your average Iraqi civilian died, right? So, we've already got lies right off the bat here. And what's more, this is entirely neutral as to whether you think that, intervening in these places was a good idea. But, which again, of course, like, you look at now, right? Like, the problem is, what did you get for intervening in these areas, right? Well, Afghanistan, like, there's a big pullout, right? Trump arranged that deal with the Taliban, which gave them full reign over the country again, which again was complete cowardly action. It was designed to go and make the world. It's designed to go and isolate America further, to boost the isolationism of America by being like, oh, look, whatever you wanted in Afghanistan failed. So now, congratulations, a bunch of Afghani girls no longer get education. They're punished for not wearing the hijabs and niqabs and the in streets. They're currently being punished for not going out with a male escort. Like, just like that's what you've got created. And of course, this is so that you can go and gaily say, oh, look how the U.S. failed in Afghanistan. Then, and also it's like then you have Iraq, which of course became a puppet state of the Iranians, right? Because there's been a great deal of cowardice in the willingness to go and confront the Iranians about anything. Because if you want to know where that comes from, like, so you have the isolationists on the right, and then you have on the far left these stupid little French commune wannabes, which have gone and continued to go and advocate for Iran because they helped go and set it up in the first place, right? Like, this Islamic theocracy was again, like, this far left element in the West helped literally set that up. So if you want to go and look that up, like, go look up how the Ayatollah was received and supported by the French communists, right? Who then, of course, because communism isn't a popular ideology, most of them went and merged into the progressive movement, which is how you get, like, the Prague Commune. You want to hear something? So, during that entire, war and terror in both Afghanistan and Iraq, literally less Americans died in those two countries that died in Chicago during the Chicago shootings during that same time. Literally, more people died from shootings in the city of Chicago than died in those two active war zones. So, you tell me what you think the problem is in America that you need to be looking at.
Of Afghanistan back to the Taliban, the war on terror's total failure was complete. As the last flag-draped coffins rolled off the plane, America's establishment warmongering class looked at their watch.
No, that so once more, it's like just immediately this propaganda. Oh, America's politicians are warmongers, etc., etc., etc. Just ridiculous, right? Like, a reminder, like this. Go look at the wars that are going on. Like, the wars right now, all those were initiated by the Russian aligned forces. Like, we look at what's happening with like Hamas and Israel, right? Hamas initiated that. Like, they were the ones that insisted on going across the border, shooting all those civilians. Like, so they initiated that war. The Russians invaded Ukraine. They initiated that war. Russians put coups in places like Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger. Like, so the wars that are happening in those sorts of regions, Russians again. Sudan, Russians again. Like, the Russian aligned government, like that's like the two forces that are fighting, right? Like, that's Russians again. So Syria, again, Russians. Just Yemen, proxies of the Iranians, right? Like, so Russia's allies. So it's just, this is what's going on, right? Like, these are the forces that you're up against, and just these are the warmongers. But of course, and Saddam Hussein was a warmonger. He invaded a neighboring country, like, and he wasn't a valid president either. He was a dictatorial regime president. Like, he didn't submit himself for elections and all that. Anytime he got into power and anytime there were elections, like, they were fraudulent. So, just ridiculous stuff.
No time to mourn. They were anxious for the next act to begin. See, fighting a war on terror is hard. Funding a war of terror, there's something new.
Yeah, so just immediately going into this again. Yeah, this is going to be all propaganda.
And that's what America's doing right now.
And that's what America is doing right now in Ukraine. Like, again, you see just the lies, right? Like, just the major lies, right?
In Ukraine. Terrorism defined is the unlawful use of violence and intimidation, especially against civilians in the pursuit of a political aim. We can prove that Ukraine, with America's help, has become a terror state.
No, Russia is the terror state. Russia goes and bombs and kills civilians. They have done... if you go to those occupied territories of Ukraine, like, I guarantee you there's tons of different acts that they've done against civilians. They've gone and intimidated civilians. They've gone and taken away their Ukrainian citizenship. They've gone and illegally annexed areas. So again, just propaganda all around. I actually hope this guy goes to jail for his propaganda. Like, this would be
not just for the nations they're at war with, but for their own people.
Because reminder, this guy is... You can sit here and listen to him on the internet, right? But the things that he's doing, the things that he's saying, these are designed to go and get more people killed in Ukraine. So these guys are all, once more, like, they want more people to be murdered, more people to be oppressed, more people to be killed, right?
Ukraine is precisely the kind of country that we swore to fight against during the global war on terror.
Once more, like, cluster munitions were deemed an effective counter to a lot of the things that Russia is doing, right? Like, to Russian troops, they're devastating against massed troops, and Russia is using massed light infantry. Cluster munitions are only immoral if they're deployed on civilian areas, or areas where civilians are likely to be affected, okay? They're not immoral when you're using them against mass infantry formations. And again, like, Russia is using these exact sort of tools, but of course, these garbage aren't going to go and ever, claim that, right? They're just going to go and...
A lawless dictatorship with lethal capacity to commit acts of terror across borders. Nobody wants to say it. We have gone from fighting a war on terror to funding a war of terror. On September 26, 2022, a deep-sea explosion ripped...
Why don't you tell us what happened in February? Yeah, Mr. Johnson, why don't you go tell us what happened in February? Why don't you tell us what happened in Bucha? Why you go tell us what the Russians did in Bucha? Oh wait, you won't. You won't, will you?
Through the underwater pipelines supplying natural gas from Russia to customers in Western Europe. This is the largest act of ecologic, environmental, and economic terrorism in Europe since the start of World War II.
So again, it's like targeting an energy infrastructure is not an act, like it's not an evil act. And what is evil is going and doing this whole double-faced thing that Europe was doing, where it's like, oh, we support Ukraine, but we're still going to be funding the Russian war effort via, importing massive amounts of gas. Like, this is immoral. They're not going. So, and by the way, if you want to know what's happened since then, so natural gas, Spain has a lot of natural gas. They built a pipeline so they can send gas to Europe. That's fine. The Norwegians, they've got oil via their sea up here. They can go send it to Europe. It's like, you get gas and oil from North Africa. In exchange, you give food to North Africa. Like, there's plenty of things that you can do, right? Plenty of things that you can do. It's just everyone wanted this cheap oil and gas that's coming out of Russia, and they didn't care about the moral impact of that. And was like, they also didn't care about the ecological impact of that, right? So you have all these movements in Europe that are talking, we're about green energy and that. And then suddenly all these green energy types are absolutely fine with getting oil from Russia just for the sake of it being cheap and because, out of sight, out of mind, right? Like, just...
2. We now know Ukraine blew up the Nord Stream pipeline.
No, we don't know that definitively. I mean, who did it? Like, again, there's a bunch of different options. There's a bunch of different players in the region that would like to go and shut off the gas and oil from Russia. So, no, you don't know that Ukraine definitively did that.
With America's direct knowledge and perhaps assistance.
Yeah, there we go again. Claiming that the U.S. is involved, which, again, no evidence of that. Where are these headlines coming from? Like, where are you demonstrating? Well, for starters, one of the biggest issues, right, is that you have to be able to get there. You have to be able to get there with a decent sized boat. Turkey, I think, as we all know, has gone and shut off the Bosphorus. So where are you launching those boats from? Like, where are you launching those boats to go and plant your demolition teams, right? Like, simply put, your there's a lot that isn't
leaked intelligence documents reveal that the U.
Once more, this is all just crap because this wouldn't be, this isn't. This isn't a terror attack anyways. So.
U.S. was informed of Ukraine's planned act of terrorism, and we did nothing about it.
And there you go, right? It's like, so a reminder, like, the Russians at this point in the war, right, they've been going and committing acts of terrorism against the Ukrainian population. They've been committing acts there, again, they've been killing Ukrainians via mass, missile strikes on cities, shelling cities. They've done, the massacre in Bucha, right? And just all these different things that they've done in the war this far. And this guy, of course, being the garbage that he is, he's not talking about any of that. He's talking about a little stupid pipeline being blown up, which, by the way, killed 0 people, 0 civilians, which by his own definition of acts of terror, this is not an act of terror. He's like, it causes fear in civilian populations. This caused absolutely 0 fear in civilian populations. It caused a lot of fear in the oligarchs who lost their wallets, like, who had to go and pay for all this. But
worse, after the terror attack, our warmongering establishment class celebrated.
Again, it's like they're turning it around. Like, they're flipping reality on its head. They're giving you an alternative story, right? Where the invader is no longer the warmongers. The warmongers are the defenders. And reminder, Zelensky pulled back those troops from the Russian border, which is how you initially had those major Russian advances, because the troops were not in their positions. And he did that as a last-ditch attempt to go and say, we do not want war with Russia. We want to go and have a peaceful situation with Russia, and this is going to be our gesture that we're and trust their peace, and then the Russians just go and take advantage of that. Again, it's like you can't trust these guys, right? Like you cannot.
For the celebration, they sent more money to Ukraine. They rewarded them. This is a common trend.
Senator Cruz, like you, I am.
By the way, again, it's like this robotic thing is weird. I have no idea why he's doing this, but. Again.
And I think the administration is very gratified to know that Nord Stream 2 is now, as you like to say, a hunk of metal at the bottom of the sea.
In the last few weeks, suicide drones launched by Ukraine began raining down on residential neighborhoods in Moscow.
No, they were attacking the factories and infrastructure in Moscow. A reminder, this is what Russia has been doing all this time. Like, literally, look, like, this guy is, like, trying to feed you, this one-sided thing. And, again, he's, like, claiming that he's not a propagandist. This is pure propaganda.
These are not military targets. This is terrible.
That's the Kremlin. That's his example of a civilian target. Like, literally, the Russian... Oh, my gosh. Like, that's literally... Like, is it not obvious to you that that is literally a government building? Like, that's literally someone going and detonating a drone on the Kremlin and taking out a flag and leaving a little scorch mark in the roof. Like...
Terrorism on civilian targets.
And again, that's not a civilian target. Like, is that not obvious that that is a government building? Like, there's literally a freaking wall there, buddy. Like it's ridiculous. Like, is it literally not obvious? Like, it should be obvious to you.
The head of Ukraine's military intelligence service bragged in a recent interview that Kyiv had assassinated citizens and journalists inside of Russia. Major General Krylov...
Can I go and... Yeah, we'll get a raid check on that, but what's more? Like, what's the sort of propaganda that we're talking about? Like, are we talking about, like a... Because if I recall correctly, that one was referring to literally, like, some government agent, like, in the occupied areas of Ukraine. What's more? It's like, yeah. So, yeah, and by the way, like, again, those sorts of people, like, again... Occupation officials in occupied territory are valid targets in a war. Like, they don't get to call themselves civilians where they're literally leading military occupations. And frankly, Russia's been going and, like, Russia goes and kills, just all
Bundanov crowed that Ukraine had successfully targeted Russian civilians.
No, he did not say that. He did not say that. Once more, this is all just the fabrication, right? Like, just fabricated stuff. So,
Ukrainian general then gave a dark threat. Outright scum will be eventually punished in any country in the world. Only elimination can be a well-deserved punishment.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, war criminals in any country that they flee to in the world, they get punished. Like, and if you can't do it legally, sometimes you do it, by taking them out. Like, yeah. What are you gonna do about Bay? Like, this is the... like, again, you remove yourself from being a moral consideration if you go and commit these sorts of actions.
Bundanov said, per the Kiev Post. These are the words of an ISIS...
No, they aren't. What makes ISIS so immoral is that they go and use terrorism and they justify it via their ideology, and they use extreme terrorism. Like, ISIS is literally the most... nihilistic group to have ever existed in humanity. I am pretty confident of that statement. Like, just I've seen their videos. I can tell you that from my estimation, that they're doing it. The things they do, they have a veneer of religion that goes and gets them all fanatical. But what their actually point is to have a bunch of guys that can just go and do all these different nihilistic acts. Like, they can go kill and murder, rape, do everything that you can imagine. Like, I do mean that everything, like torture, everything. And they can then go and justify that with the religion. Like, that's... And tribal leaders... No, ISIS is not tribal. They're not associated with the tribes in the Middle East. Those groups hate ISIS.
Tribal leader, not an American ally, getting billions in aid. What are the civilian...
You also note that, like, absolutely no... Oh, and by the way, remember, the Russian journalists and that sort of thing. They often talking about here, like they're not even like a lot of the guys that are embedded in those military units. Like they fire, they'll like fire assault rifles at Ukrainians at a distance, right? Like one that I saw killed was literally during a Ukraine trench raid. He was literally like carrying an assault rifle, and like the Ukrainian guy got the drop bomb like just around the corner because of course this guy's not a soldier, right? So he's like using an assault rifle, but he's trying to go and kill Ukrainians, and then the Russians still have the gall to go and call that guy like as though he's some kind of victim in all of this. When again he's like literally participating in aggressive war, literally trying to go and kill Ukrainian soldiers, and they're still going to call him like a journalist target.
Targets
right?
was Russian war correspondent Valdin Tatarsky. Tatarsky died in an explosion at a St. Petersburg cafe when he was handed a...
What happened here was actually that this was a high-level Wagner gathering, right? There were like dozens of Wagner guys gathered in this particular cafe, and the war correspondent was speaking to them. It's unclear about who exactly was targeting this place, because again, remember, this is when there's this big dispute between Wagner and the Russian military establishment as well, right? So it's unclear about who exactly targeted this. It's unlikely that this journalist specifically was the actual military target in this case. It's more likely that the attempt was to go and, again, kill a bunch of these, officers of the Wagner group, right? But of course, they won't tell you this, right?
Bomb in broad daylight. 24 others were taken to the hospital, 6 in critical condition.
Oh, yeah, Wagner guys. Like, literally, this is what this... Like, again, go look up this incident. It's literally a bunch of... Again, like, soldiers in a cafe. Like, this is literally, like, ranking officers in a cafe. And it's like, yeah.
29-year-old daughter of Russian political commentator Alexander Dugin was killed in...
She wasn't probably not even the target of this, by the way. If I recall correctly, they actually went switched cars, or did get the correct cars. So the actual goal was to go and take out Dugin here. And as for who wanted to go do that, again, it's like Dugin as his opponents in Russia. Like, so it's like you just want to go and blame Ukraine for this. And she's not a loving person. She's a warmonger. He's a warmonger. He literally goes and justifies terrorism all the time. He justifies all these imperialistic acts. Neither of them are good people. In her case, were good people. So, yeah, don't stop trying to pretend like these are some kind of victims here.
August the 20th.
And remember, Russia will go and kill journalists all the time. They go and kill political opposition figures. They have a big tendency to assassinate opposition figures in Europe that they don't like. So, just remember.
A bomb placed in her father's car exploded as she drove through Moscow. Earlier this month, Russian writer Zakhar Preplin was injured in a similar car bomb attack. The Ukrainian terror is not limited to outside.
And a reminder, it's like, I have to ask, like, in World War II, if the resistance went and killed Joseph Goebbels via a car bomb, like, would you say that is a terrorist attack? I mean, it might be interpreted that way, but it's like, again, like, if your point is that, it's always illegitimate to go and target propagandists, it's funny, this guy is, of course, a propagandist, but, like, would that be considered a terrorist attack? Like, would it? I think not. I think that the point is that these are persons whose rhetoric goes and encourages, people to engage in violent acts, to go and kill more, right? It goes and is one of the major driving forces of the war, right? Without propaganda, you would not really have this sort of major war. But it's just like, and all, and again, like you pointed out, like, in that case, what was it? Like, the only one, like 103 of those was, like, actually targeted specifically by a car bomb. Like, even that last guy, I think there was something different that went on there, but and then of course, not factoring in that, there is a reason why people have that whole meme about big Russians who go to oppose Putin falling out of windows, because that's literally what happened. So literally doesn't address any of that. This is purely presenting Russia as a victim, right? Like purely just ignores everything that they've done. Ignores all the attacks that they've committed way before the Ukrainians. Remember, there's a phrase from Bomber Harris, right? Who's of course the leader of the UK Air Force during World War II, where basically he said the Germans, the Nazis, right, were under the naive impression that they could go and bomb everyone in Europe and that they themselves would not be bombed, and so they bombed Warsaw, London, Amsterdam, 50 other places in Europe, and they were under the impression that they themselves would not be bombed. And so then when he says, they brought the wind and now they will reap the whirlwind, right? That's essentially what he said, paraphrasing. And so then suddenly when the UK goes and bombs the Nazi cities, well, suddenly they go and start, screaming about it in the media. Even if you go to read Hitler's last statement last statement before he goes and, does his thing, right? He says, he literally includes a rant against the Allied bombing campaigns against, German cities, right? But it's like, this is what they initiated. They were the ones that started this, right? It wasn't the other Allied forces that started these sorts of mass bombings. It was the Germans, and they were under the pressure that, we could go and do all these things and we'll never be targeted by other people. And then they get targeted by other people. So, and Ukraine isn't even anywhere near that level of, again, brutality that was portrayed in those bombing campaigns, right? Just isn't.
Of Ukraine's borders, plenty happens inside of Ukraine's borders. In 2022, the New York Times reported that Ukraine intentionally flooded one of its villages when troops opened a near...
Again, for starters, the New York Times once more is a news source that is heavily infiltrated by forces sympathetic to the Russians, and this is why they go and constantly run these sorts of headlines. Yes, they'll run articles critical of the Russians as well, but they'll run a lot of key ones you'll notice they're pro-Russian. So just keep that in mind. But also, again, it's absolutely proven that the Russians were the ones who did this, right? Those dams were literally built to go and withstand nuclear explosions, which means that if you want to go and destroy a dam, you have to go and do it internally. Just external explosions will not go and take them out. So basically, the Russians went and blew up the dam, right? They blew it up, and they were intending to go and flood this. They went and flooded a bunch of the Ukrainian areas, right? They forced a mass evacuation. They were the ones that went and did that, right? So it's and if you want to know the reason why they did that, well, they again was military reasons. They were basically expecting that would drive the Ukrainian forces back, and they were essentially caused an ecological catastrophe in Ukraine. It destroyed a lot of Ukrainian housing. What they were really truly intending was that it would go and surge over Kherson, right, which they'd lost. That was the point, to go and conduct a revenge attack against the city of Kherson for simply losing it, which was, again, Kherson being their prize, their big prize that they had in the war. And of course, Ukrainians went and took Kherson back, right? So that was the intention, and of course, it didn't end up working out that way, but it did cause a lot of issues in the region, all right? Of course, it caused issues for them too, right? Crimea has a lot less water now that they went and did this, but they, of course, being the short-sighted, just destructive assholes that they are, that's essentially what happened. But of course, with this guy, he's like, oh, the Ukrainians did. Well, again, the Ukrainians did not control that dam. These dams are built to literally withstand a nuclear explosion. They're not going to be taken out by a few cruise missiles hitting them, right? They're not going to be taken. Ukraine didn't even have mass cruise missiles at this time. They had HIMARS. They're not going to be taken out by a few HIMARS shots. Again, these are massive concrete structures. The way that you have to go and destroy them is via internal explosions, and that's exactly what happened. Internal explosions.
by dam. This was not an outlier, according to the Times. Ukraine has been swift and effective in wreaking havoc.
That's a fascinating thing, is it? So the New York Times, again, Vatnik Central, right? Like, not a reliable news source. Like, don't rely upon the New York Times. Simple is, like, again, they're infiltrated. They don't put out reliable stuff. They've been putting out garbage on Ukraine. They put out garbage on Israel. Like, this is a garbage news source. And just the fact that it's, like, the sooner people recognize that it's this garbage source, like, again, don't let it have power. But of course, being that it's a garbage source, he, of course, being garbage himself, wants to go and cite it.
On its own territory, often by destroying infrastructure. The Washington Post ominously wrote in December that Ukraine conducted a test strike on the massive Nova Dam.
Again, where's the evidence that this has happened? Like, you don't get to just go and throw at stuff like this and say that this definitely happened. It's like...
for the spring offensive. The dam was blown up this month, causing catastrophic flooding, destruction of an entire region, and a potential nuclear disaster by cutting off cooling to a nuclear plant. The dam...
what's for it? Again, literally what happened, right? Like, Russians went and put in, internal explosives. Like, this is literally what happened. Ugh.
Had been under Russian control since February.
Yeah.
So why would Russia blow up such a...
Well, for starters, again, they just want to cause as much misery and havoc as possible. That's their mindset. But it's like, you see where I'm going. Like, this is what I was explaining earlier about this exact dam blowing up, right? Like, it can't be blown up via what you're thinking, like a HIMARS, right? Like, this isn't how this works. Like, it's literally internal sabotage. Like, this is how you go and blow up this sort of dam. These things are, again, meant to withstand bombing campaigns. They're just not meant to withstand, like, mass internal explosives that are being placed inside and that can go and, blast holes in them. And once you have a hole in a dam, it crumbles away, right? Like, just, okay. But of course, none of these guys actually understand any of that, and so just like the crappy little journalists that they cite, they're going to go and
strategic
argue
asset.
For it.
Much like Ukraine blaming Russia for blowing up the Nord Stream, it makes no sense. But
yes, it does. Once more, it was an attempt to go and conduct revenge against Kherson City and the Ukrainians there. Just ridiculous.
In America, nothing happening inside of Ukraine would make any sense to you. Life under the rule of Zelensky is entirely antithetical to the values you assume America.
Okay, again, he's a comedian. Like, he's not exactly a comedian anymore, is he? Like, what exactly?
Fights for. The Zelensky regime has criminalized free speech.
It's a war. What do you want? Do you want people to be like, oh, you can go and, funnel information to the Russians? Do you want to say, oh, you can go and report on troop movements? Like, again, it's a war. You have to do these things in a war. And it's difficult, especially when you're in the sort of situation that you are now where everyone has, like, massive access to the internet. Like, it's very difficult to go and regulate.
They've shuttered media outlets.
Yeah, propaganda outlets. Like, literally propaganda outlets that are putting forth Russian propaganda. Like, again. Everything that these people want is, like, ridiculous, right? But they just want you to go and be constantly, again, inverting the script. When it's like, so why should you, as a person who wants to go and, again, support the literal invaders of your country, like, why should you be allowed that sort of speech in a time of war? Like, literally. Frankly, like, it's pretty ridiculous that you have that in, like, that's literally harmful in times of peace, which is, again, what you're about to see the U.S. go and point out here when they go and take on people like your Benny Johnsons. And by the way, again, Benny Johnson, non-innocent influencer, right? Like, we're proving this now. Like, he is literally a propagandist, just like Tim Pool is a propagandist. We're proving this entire video that he's been doing.
They've exerted full totalitarian state control over private business, banks, and property.
what's more, totalitarianism, that has a very different definition than you're thinking of. Putin's Russia is totalitarian. Ukraine is committed to being non-ideological. If you don't understand how exactly, again, Ukraine says we're not an ideological state in their constitution. Putin is an ideological state, and he says you have to go and believe that in my ideology, right? That is totalitarianism. Ukraine is not a totalitarian state. It is a liberal, essentially a right liberal state, okay, that is at war. Like, that is what you define Ukraine as. And yeah, no presidential election in Ukraine till war ends, Zelensky, because that is what the Constitution of Ukraine specifies, that in the event of war, you do not have presidential elections, all right? As far as, like, again, it's war. Like, it's a war of survival of war, an existential war. Like, none of these types of courses ever get, like, what that existential war actually looks like, but...
The Zelensky regime openly persecutes Christians and Christian priests.
What's more, these are agents of the Russian government. You cannot go... The Russian... This is like going to Iran and saying, Shia Islam is somehow separate in Iran from the Ayatollah. It's absolutely absurd, right? And same way, the Moscow form of Christianity is an absolutely and utterly controlled form of Christianity that exists as an organ of the Russian state. And in the same way, it's these Orthodox priests that they have, these Orthodox patriarchs that they have in Ukraine, right? Like, they don't exist for the benefit of the Ukrainians. They exist for the benefit of Russians. And these men have been caught doing propaganda and spying and all these sorts of things. They've been, their churches were being used as literally information dumps for Russian spies. Like, again, so it's like, and a reminder, then all this, Russia is the one that goes and persecutes Christians. Like, Protestants in Russia are persecuted, right? Jehovah's Witnesses in Russia are persecuted. In the occupied territories, the territories in Ukraine that Russia occupies, they persecute these sorts of Christians. They persecute the Ukrainian Orthodox, right? The Ukrainians just say, we want to have our own Orthodox church. You know, just like the Latvians have their own Orthodox church, the Greeks have their own Orthodox church. We want our own Orthodox church. We don't want to be linked to the Russian patriarch. Like, we don't want Patriarch Kirill to be the one who is in charge of things. Because, again, Patriarch Kirill, a reminder, it's a KGB agent. Like, that's where he comes from. And all these different old guys, right? Like, the old guys that are priests, they were originally KGB agents as well. So the entire point is to act as a propaganda source for the Russian regime and to go and give that propaganda a religious confirmation. Like, that is what they do, okay? And meanwhile, in Ukraine, reminder, like, the Ukrainians, like, the Ukrainians do not go and persecute, Christians or Muslims or Jews or any other sort of religion that wants to go and live there, right? They just, this particular branch of Orthodoxy, the Russian Orthodoxy, which again is an organ of the state, it was set up as a propaganda organ by the KGB during the Soviet Union. Like, this is what they are driving out of themselves, all right?
Church leaders. They've trampled civil liberties of their citizens and outlawed rival political parties.
There's still a bunch of different political parties in Ukraine. Here's what's happened. They've outlawed the Russian-affiliated political parties and the the communist parties. Oh, Mr. Right-Winger. Oh, apparently, though, you're so... Remember, these guys, they actually like communism as well, by the way. They like it when the Russians do it and the Chinese do it. They just, because of course they admire the authoritarians, right? These are the parties that have been banned in Ukraine. So it's like, again, what's more? It's the equivalent in World War II and various different allied countries. I'm going to say, you little fascist parties that have, tens of thousands of members or what that, we're going to go and ban you. We're going to go and arrest your leaders and we're going to toss your leaders in prison. Like, this is literally what's happening, and this is stuff that has to be done, right? Like, it has to be done to keep social order. You cannot have these parties that are explicitly against your existence, and these parties also barely had any political representation in Ukrainian politics anyways, right? Because the Ukrainians are smart enough to know what these garbage are, right? And most of these trashy types. They went over to the Donbass republics anyways, right? Once those things were established, because of course that's what you would do as a communist sympathizer.
While arresting their political opponents. Sound familiar?
Again, it's like not even telling you anything. Like, just look at how little context that he's giving for each and every single one of these points that he's making. Like, just this is propaganda, right? This is what pure propaganda looks like.
That's why Joe Biden is so keen to fund this regime.
Again, Joe Biden has... last time I checked, the Republicans were in control of Congress in the U.S. When was the last time they can say that there was a Republican congressman or senator who got arrested? Like, no, he is not mass purging his political opponents. And as last time I checked, the Republican Party is still considered to be a perfectly valid party in the United States, as are many other political parties in the United States.
I want to take a second and make something very clear. We're not on the side of Russia.
Yeah. Are you sure about that, buddy? We're just going to tell you that Ukraine is a horrible, awful place that does all these despicable acts and is literally a terrorist state. But no, we're not on the side of Russia. That's
for damn sure. Russia's preemptive attack against Ukraine is evil. It's destroyed the lives of millions of people, and Ukraine should defend itself from invasion.
Would you mind telling me exactly how that corresponds with anything that you said? Like, what's more, these disclaimers, they don't mean anything because look what they've done. They've gone and infiltrate a ton of propaganda into your mind, right? Like, this is literally what they've done. They've gone and just saturated you, and then they're going to go and say these little disclaimers are just so they can point out and say, oh, I'm not a Russian agent, I'm not a Russian propagandist. But again, it's all crap.
As should all sovereign nations. But anybody who tells you that they're on the side of the angels in a war is lying to you. I'm not...
See what I mean? It's like... A reminder, Russia literally claims to be on the side of the angels. They literally say that, oh, we're fighting Satan, right? Like, literally, go look up Putin's speech. He's literally saying, I'm fighting Satan, right? Like, again, like, literally, that's what his propaganda claim is.
Ukrainian, and I'm not Russian. I'm an American. We should be able to look at this conflict neutrally.
A reminder, he just said that the United States has been supporting a terrorist state throughout this. And as far as neutral, again, you just labeled one side a terrorist state. Like, he didn't... What for us is just propaganda, right? Like...
We are responsible for our government's actions.
Actually, no. No, you are not. Because here's the thing. Only a certain percentage of people actually vote for, well, basically, like, it's a representative democracy, which means that, like, the extent to which the average citizen actually is represented there, again, you have to go and debate that, right? But the point is that, like, as a collective, I say that you're responsible for your government's actions. Like, well, yeah, if they were, I suppose, in the party platform and then the majority of the population agreed with that, I guess, but, you know, it's like...
And my government is clearly funding what has become an unstable and dangerous regime, antithetical to American values in a conflict.
No, absolutely not. Again, it's like Ukraine holds to the American values of freedom, everything about Ukraine is very much American. Like, it's one of the, comparing America to Europe, right? Like, Ukraine is literally one of the most American places in Europe in terms of the correspondence of their values. And that makes complete sense, right? Because what is Ukraine? Well, Ukraine is considered to be like the frontier region of Europe, right? So it fosters a certain mindset in its people, right? Like the way that the Cossacks lived, right? Like, these are people who are very similar to how, American settler lived, like the sort of mindset of an American settler. Like, so, Ukraine does have very American values in that sense.
That has the potential to escalate into a third world war.
There you go, fear-mongering, right? Just, reminder again, the points that I addressed with the new, right? Like, double standards, fear-mongering, inversion, like all these things.
As the sides become increasingly desperate. This leads to the final question. What happened to the anti-war left?
Well, I mean, there's still a ton of them around. But, as far as, again, it's like, you're dealing with like the far left is still like hyper against. Well, far left is hyper pro, Russia's wars, right? Anything that a anti-Western country does, they're hyper against the Western wars, right? Like that's sort of what you're looking at there.
You'd think that there'd be a group of people that would stand up and march in the streets against America's warmongering class. It would be liberals.
Once more, so again, like this is ridiculous, right? Like Putin's literally the one that's doing the aggressive war. It's like Ukraine is defending itself. Why would there be masses of liberals who are going and protesting against Ukraine? You'll notice that basically you have to have this sort of mindset where, in terms of understanding like what the left goes and protests against, is that the left will always need these prepared issues, right? Like Palestine, like that is a prepared issue. That is an issue that the academics have obsessed over. And so even in the face of, there being a massively greater, humanitarian crisis in Syria and Sudan, that is what the left went and rallied around because that was their prepared issue. That was the one they were all prepared with their little slogans and stuff. It doesn't matter that the, Hamas is this authoritarian Islamo-fascist, government. It's just that they want to go and, do this prepared issue. And so also their followers are pretty, like, let's be real, if you're in the far left, you're pretty brain dead, right? But anyways, as far as liberals go, again, like liberals, like this is just a word that means centrist, right? So it's like center left, center right, like center. Like this is all that liberal means nowadays, okay? Of course, being an American, he's going to use it in the slang term just for left-wingers, which, funny enough, isn't even really correct because it's like left is oftentimes opposed to liberalism, but anyways.
But all of a sudden, well, we're kind of alone out here. The left loves war. They love global terrorism.
Again, it's like, just the political miscategorization here is really terrible, right? Like, just, like, once more, none of these guys really understand, like, the mentality of the far left either, right? Like, they just want to go and slag off, like, the center left and then the, barely left-wingers and then be like, that's their impression of what the left is when, again, it's like, they have no idea what they're actually dealing with. And they want remember, because when I go and point out something, for example, like I could go and point that they're like anti-fascists and communists in Europe, they're going and like hyper protesting in support of Russia during this entire war, right? Like I could go and point that out, but that would be inconvenient because then that would be something that at least the more lucid of the conservatives in the audience of this guy would be like, well, that's a bit of an odd one. Why do they go and still support Russia? Like, is it Russia, this based Christian theocracy state? Like, it's like, of course, being lucid, you're probably not obsessing about that, but
they love big corporations who are profiting from all of it. Put a Ukrainian flag in your bio and beg for...
again, like are these? I don't think any of these are far left. Like, organic farmer, like really, like. This is your idea of a far left person. Again, it's like, okay.
And more ammo.
Oh, BlackRock, of course.
Is totally foreign to somebody who's my age. When I was growing up, the left looked like this.
Yeah, because... yeah. Oh, well, even then, let me ask you this. Like, the Democratic Party, like, did they support the Iraq War or did they not support the Iraq War? Answer, they supported the Iraq War, they supported the Afghanistan War, okay? These were a minority of groups, and again, largely in the, like, there were some in the, just the general left, but there were a lot in the far left, right? Like, just, ridiculous. So my point is, though, that this is not the reality of the situation. Like, again, the Democrats in the U.S. supported those wars, okay? In my country, in Canada, right, like, the Liberal Party was the one in power when we decided to go into Afghanistan, okay? Like, so, and again, like, Liberal Party in Canada at that time, probably more like in the center-left sort of vein. It's kind of drifted a bit more left since then, but anyways. Point being that yeah, these were support. As far actually in terms of, I believe in Canada only the Green Party member, which is like one member out of everyone in Parliament, like voted against going and participating in the Afghanistan war. So there's actually a broad consensus to go and do these things, like whether you like it or not. Like there just really was.
And when my parents were growing up, the left looked like this.
Which again, the hippies were a communist front organization. Like it wasn't. There were some frustrations with the draft in that, but a lot of it wasn't as grassroots as you think it was. It was supported by the anti-South Vietnam was literally supported by these exact same guys like Benny Johnson, right? In the U.S. media, where they went and presented utterly false statements. Like there's one very familiar one where a Buddhist priest, they filmed this guy, right, burning himself alive. And so what he was actually protesting against was the South Vietnam government giving favors to the Catholic Church and basically doing some persecution acts against the Buddhism, right, their faith. And so then this was warped by the journalists in the Western world who were, again, part of this whole hippie-style movement, like this whole anti-South Vietnam movement. This was warped into, this Buddhist priest went and burned himself alive because he wanted peace in the war, right? Like, these are the sorts of propaganda acts that you're talking about. They also then wanted to go and compare, like, the South Vietnamese government to, like, the South, like Jim Crow South. Like, they literally did that, right? Where it's like, look at how the South Vietnamese are going and suppressing people in the streets, blah, blah, blah. Again, exact same thing, right? North Vietnam committing way more atrocities than South Vietnamese ever did. But because the garbage in the media, like all these trash propagandist journalists went and, got all the population to go and think this way. A reminder, like, the last offensive that's, or that the big offensive, like Tet offensive, right, that the North Vietnamese did was an absolute and utter failure. Their state was stretched to the absolute limits at that time, which means that had America gone and supported South Vietnam in that, they literally would have won. But of course, because all these types were like, now South Vietnam can't go and defend itself, and look how it's being attacked all across the country, let's go and pull out, right? So it's like just ridiculous stuff, right? Like, and of course, absolutely no care for your fellow citizens. And the only reason, by the way, that Vietnam turned out better than a lot of the other communist states is simply because, they basically had to do an emergency national unity for, to get, like, so basically the North Vietnamese could exercise the sort of repressive measures on the South Vietnamese that they actually want to, because almost immediately after the Vietnamese War, they found themselves under attack by the Khmer Rouge, which went and invaded South Vietnam, killed, 1,500 civilian villagers. Boy, doesn't that sound familiar, does it, right? And so that provoked a war between Vietnam and Cambodia, right? Vietnamese ended up winning that war in Cambodia, but then in retaliation for taking out the Khmer Rouge, the Chinese went and invaded Vietnam, and then the Vietnamese ended up winning the war against China. But by that time, they need, they have to go and compromise, right, between the North and South Vietnamese populations, right? They can't be like this hardcore, because they really need everyone on board, because otherwise you're dealing with a situation where you simply can't have, like, the South Vietnamese being resentful of the North Vietnamese. So basically they have to do a big national unity get together, and they have to go and make certain compromises. And so that's essentially how you get modern day Vietnam with its sort of paradoxes. But point being, though, that, like, again, this is sort of a but yeah, it's like the sort of reasons why the U.S. went and got out of Vietnam just weren't good ones, right? Just weren't good ones.
In small.
And a reminder, like, the U.S. wasn't even suffering very high casualties. Like people might be surprised just how small the number of casualties that the U.S. was suffering in these sorts of areas were.
Arenas, leftist anti-war activists still call out their own. Here's how AOC was greeted in her own district recently after voting to fund the forever war in Ukraine.
Again, forever war. Like look at this. They're calling back all these different propaganda terms once more. Remember, the libertarians took a bunch of left-wing terminology, right, and they went and funneled it into the right, and this is how you ended up with the right going and repeating these sorts of, again, left-wing terminologies, right?
Congresswoman, none of this matters unless there's a nuclear war, which you voted to send arms and weapons to Ukraine.
So, you know, again, it's like all this fear-mongering, right? Remember, the political extremists, right, if you want to know what they are, like, they're literally fear. Like, they're frightened, they're paranoid. This is exactly what they are. Like, this is just their mentality, and it's one of the things that drives them on to do everything that they do. Just one of the things, though.
The simple truth, lost on these activists, unfortunately. Leftists are the establishment now.
Again, I should also point out that this is ridiculous. Like, this talking point is ridiculous. Poland had a right-wing government at the start of the Ukraine war, and they currently have a center-right government or a centrist government. It's basically a coalition of different parties, right? The president is still, again, part of the right wing. Czechia is dominated by right-wing parties, does not even have leftists, barely any sort of left representation in their government, which is interesting to begin with, right? Because Czechia is the most atheist state in Europe, and apparently the guys like this are like, atheism somehow corresponds with hyper-leftism. Well, go look at Czechia. Czechia doesn't even have left-wing parties in their government. But again, like, yeah, President of Czechia, again, right-winger, right? So, yeah, and there's a variety in Europe, right? Like, in Germany, center-left, right? In France, Macron considers himself to be a centrist. These are forces that are supportive of Ukraine. In the Anglosphere countries, Canada, the UK, both the conservatives and the liberals, like, these both go and support Ukraine. So it's like, all right. And one more thing to point out, like, again, it's like, it's like leftists are the establishment now. Like, it really varies depending upon where you're talking about, but and like, again, it's like, what are you talking about? Like, are you talking about like center left, like liberals? Or are you talking about, again, far left? Because it's not going to be far left as the establishment. Like, center left liberals, that's true in some countries, not just true in others. Just,
And the establishment has always been pro-war. They just think you're dumb enough to be fooled by the colorful virtue signaling.
There we go. Like, virtue signaling, again, all these sorts of languages, right? Again, supporting people who are defending themselves against your literal historic opponent. Like, literally an opponent that literally claims a part of the United States, right? The Russians, they claim Alaska and a lot of the other surrounding territory in northern Canada. Like, just ridiculous, right?
Mega corporations are bankrolling off this war.
Oh, yeah. Yep, corporations, again, blah, blah, blah.
Cheers for them.
And once more, the far left is against Ukraine by and large.
They cheer when billions of dollars of weapons are sent to Ukraine. There's no way to track any of those weapons, right? We have.
Actually, there is, because the Ukrainians track them. Like, literally, the government in Ukraine goes and tracks where they end up. Like, ugh.
No idea where they're going or whose hands they're.
Oh, is he going to go and say the Hamas line?
Going to end up in. It's not going to be good. Yet here at home, these same leftists scream for gun control.
Because the violence and the mothers that we have to...
Once more, these are two separate issues, like how you feel about military defense and how you feel about what should be done with firearms in a different country. Like, these are entirely separate things, right? So, like, some of the state... Well, you look at, like, at China, for example, where it's like, you can't literally... Basically, no one in China can own a gun, right? Except for, like, if you're a high-ranking Communist Party member, and even then, I think you have to go, like, leave the thing at a police station, right? It's like, but they still have, like, hyper-militarized society, right? These things aren't correlated to one another.
Comfort are losing children due to the guns and the carnage and the lawlessness.
Once more, this has absolutely nothing to do with Ukraine.
Unleashed by those states.
It makes no sense. They claim to care about infrastructure. and the working man. But domestically, America is falling to pieces.
Again, like, these are talking points, right? It's like, oh, money could be better spent, invested in America, blah, blah, blah. Well, again, part of America's wealth and prosperity, its international reputation, right? It comes from the fact that it has a strong alliance of countries, a strong alliance of trade partners, a strong network of, places in the world, and its military goes and supports that, right? So the American Navy goes and supports, protecting the various shipping lanes that America deems vital, right? And it's like, oh yeah, again, train derailings happen, like they happen all the time. Like you only hear about the significant ones, and this one was significant because what happened is that the railway went and this was East Palestine, right? The train derailing there. Basically, the railway line did not do its due diligence while it was transporting this very deadly chemical, and basically went and contaminated a large area, right? Like, that's just the reality. Like, so these things happen, and I would imagine they've received a very big fine for engaging in this sort of behavior. But
our border is a crime scene. Our nation is collapsing.
Once more fear-mongering, everything's terrible, the sky is falling, apocalypse, blah, blah, blah. This is a reminder, like, again, the guys that this guy's supporting, these Republicans, like Trump and that, they obfuscated the border control bills that would have actually helped to go and, sort this thing out. Which means that, and they did that all for just political gain, right?
When was the last time we spent $1 billion on protecting our...
All the time. Like, that's hilarious. I think, there's a very high budget for border protection in the U.S. Like, and everywhere. Like, the Coast Guard, for example, that's border protection, right? Like, the U.S. spends a lot on protecting its borders. But remember, everyone that goes through that border in the South is caught, right? The issue is that there isn't enough asylum judges to go and process their claims to see who is legitimate and who is not legitimate. So,
border. We're protecting Ukrainians every single day. There are more than 40,000 homeless veterans in America. 11% of all homeless people are vets. Yet we're funding terrorists abroad better than our own vets.
What's more, like, Ukrainians are terrorists. Like, literally, this is his talking point, right? Like, just ridiculous stuff, right? He wants you to go and be biased against them. A reminder, this is while he's declaring, oh, I'm not pro-Russian, right? Like, ridiculous, right? What about... So, what would you take away from this video? Like, that little disclaimer they made, like, if Ukrainian government are terrorists, then why exactly is Russia, like, unjustified in going and attacking them? Like, literally, that's... And they would be justified, right? But it's like... and also this business with the homeless vets, right? It's like the people that you are dealing with would not be giving money to these veterans anyways. Like, they wouldn't be. And homelessness, as a reminder, once more, is not an issue that can be easily solved. A lot of people that are homeless, there are support structures that exist to go and get you out of a state of homelessness. But a lot of people who are homeless do not want to go and do that. They are addicted to going and living on the fringes of society, to being, to using drugs, to considering themselves essentially lawless, not a part of society. Like, this is one of the big reasons why the homeless types exist, okay? It is not because there's a lack of attempting to go and solve the issue, all right?
Veterans here at home who are maimed because of terrorism. We sent our military to Iraq and Afghanistan to fight terrorists. And now the veterans of those wars are homeless on the streets.
Again, the vast majority not homeless, okay? They just... yeah. So much more, though. It's like, what's the deal with, like, do people like this, do they want to be homeless on the street? Like, again, it's like, you have to realize this is the deal, right? Like, just the majority of people that are homeless, okay, they end up wanting to go and, like, they want to be on the streets for various different reasons. And it doesn't mean that they're all drug users, right? Like, I've seen videos with people who, again, are... The guy in that situation was a vet, right? He wanted to be on the street. Like, he wanted to be homeless. He didn't want to go and live in a home. He wanted to just live on the streets in California. So again, it's like this is a very difficult issue to solve. It is not an easy one that just is like, oh, throw money at the thing. That's not, you can't go and solve it just by doing that. Like there's a lot of stuff that has to go on. But anyways,
neglected by our own federal government.
it's like,
Funding Ukraine. There's something deeply disturbing, completely backwards about that. It's dark, it's wrong, and nobody is talking about it.
and once more, it's like this guy's like, oh, we're funding terrorism now. It's like,
So I guess we will. Ukraine is.
a reminder, this is an emotional point. Like 11,000 U.S. If let's say whatever percentage of homeless people are, like, point being that these are things. The U.S. has a very wide social security apparatus. Okay, like it has a very wide number of social programs, right? And I point out that the state that most of these homeless people are in is California, right? Which is like literally, if California was its own country, it would be in like the top 10 richest countries in the world. Okay, so California has a lot of social programs to go out and help people. Okay, so it's not just an issue of the U.S. federal government. Like the state governments also have their own ways of handling these things. It's just about getting the will to go and do that. Okay, it's like, but again, once more, these aren't issues that are solved just by throwing money at them. So, yeah.
Sadly, precisely the kind of country that we swore to fight against.
No, Russia is exactly the sort of country that the U.S. swore to fight against. Russia is this expansionist, imperialist country that is going and meddling with the peace of the world. Russia is the country that the U.S. swore to fight against. Ukraine is the sort of country that the U.S. swore to defend. Okay? And by the way, it swore to defend Ukraine literally. It literally swore to defend Ukraine in the event of Russian aggression, and has not only barely got, it's like met the bare minimum of what it was supposed to do. Because remember, Ukraine was supposed to have nuclear weapons at the end of the Cold War, right? When the Soviet Union broke up, Ukraine had the second highest number of nuclear weapons in the ex-Soviet states, right? Second only to Russia. And they said to the U.S., we will give those up. The U.S. actually very much pressured them to go and give them to Russia, no less, right? Like, this is what the U.S. did. And they said, fine, we will go and do that. In the exchange, you will promise to go and defend us in the event that Russia conducts aggressive measures against us, okay? And remember, the U.S. failed to go and do that under Obama, right? It failed to go and protect Ukraine when the Russians stole Crimea. It just went and accepted that. It did cowardly. It gave them a little bit of weapons during the Trump era, like some of those javelins, that sort of thing, right? So Trump gave them those, and that was just as a general part of Trump thumbing his nose at Russia, right? And then when Russia invaded during Biden, well, Biden was finally the one who gave them a lot of military equipment, but it was also military equipment that was, again, transferred to, it was too late to be effective in that initial wave assault, right, where the initial time when it would have been most effective. So that's what's essentially been happening.
In the global war on terror, a lawless dictatorship with lethal capacity.
No, Ukraine is not a lawless dictatorship. Once more, like, again, Russia is the dictatorship. In Russia, Putin can do whatever he wants. In Iran, the Ayatollah can do whatever he wants. In China, Xi can do whatever he wants. In Venezuela, Maduro can do whatever he wants. In Nicaragua, Ortega can do whatever he wants. Okay? In Syria, Assad can do whatever he wants. Like, again, this is how these countries that are aligned with Russia react. And in Africa, right, they set up a bunch of military dictatorships. Those guys can do whatever they want. Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, military dictatorships, right? So, these are the dictatorships in the world. Of course, this guy just lying to you once more. Been lying throughout this whole thing. He's been giving you little tiny snippets, not elaborating at all on these snippets, like not going into any sort of depth on these issues. This has been a 10-minute video. I spent an hour on this or something. So it's like, you see that this is what actually talking about and examining all these points looks like. not going and creating these little snippet videos that go and give you the illusion that you're a smart person by watching them, right? This gives you an illusion that you're an informed person by watching this sort of, 9-minute trash compilation, right?
To commit acts of terror across borders. Nobody wants to say it. We've gone from fighting a war on terror to funding a war of terror.
And a reminder, Charlie Kirk and his TPUSA organization, they were the ones that have been promoting this video. Oh, look. Wow. Literally their logo here. Was this literally done on their... Wow, this was literally done on their channel. That says something, doesn't it? That says some very big something. This wasn't even done on Ben Johnson's channel. This was done on TPUSA's channel. Wow, that's fascinating. Oh my gosh. But there you go. There you have it. TPUSA, congratulations. You went to support this jackass. I hope, by the way, the U.S. Feds now go and look at the TPUSA because they've been supporting a lot of interesting stuff, right? So, yeah, very interesting.
It's dreadful, awful, worst place around. So stinking, creaky, morally unprofound. This country's gone down the drain, and I'm ashamed to call it by name. Scream so much on Twitter, but still nothing seems to change. Getting really ticked off hearing something's gotta change. Things around here ain't perfect, and that's not right for me. Things around here ain't perfect, so let's burn the stage and street. Got a new game plan to shake things right up. You can play at dirty, don't need clean hands, surely. I'm talking on the internet, engaging in free thought. People are talking shit, and my head bobs as I agree. Things around here ain't perfect, and that's not right for me. Things around here ain't perfect, so let's burn the stage and street. Got a new game plan to shake things right up. Play it at dirty, don't need clean hands, surely. And talking on the internet, engaging in free thought. People are talking shit, and my head bobs as I agree. Got a new game plan to shake things right up. You can play at dirty, don't need clean hands, surely. And talking on the internet, engaging in free thought. People are talking shit, and my head bobs as I agree. So now I think, why should I be poor? Can get a sweet payout for spitting truths, and with bots I won't be ignored. Regretting your choices yet? I laugh at so-called countrymen. I don't owe you scum any loyalty time, cause you're the enemy to me, and the man in Moscow agrees. I'll call you Satan, you like how that sounds. I'll call you globalist, you like how that sounds. I'll call you communist. Oh hey, my check from Beijing just clear, where was I? Oh yes. I'll call you banksters, you like how that sounds. I'll call you devils, you like how that sounds. I'll call you well, whatever I'm told to. This is the truth movement, baby. We tell truths here, the ones we're paid to tell. We're all about the truth and about the money. Call myself a hardcore Christian, so I'm gonna praise China's new system. Only critique is internal, yo, cause evil from only one source does flow. You're all Satan, we're God. Well, dear leader in Moscow, you're looking for a deal, got a complete package for you, and here it is, if that's alright for you. I'd sell you my mother for a nickel. You can have my soul for a dime. Sell out my country for $1, and humanity for a $5. Oh yes I do, oh yes I do. Freedom's collapsing everywhere, and I'm cheering it all. Oh yes I do, oh yes I do. I welcome our new overlords. Oh yes I do, oh yes I do. Freedom's collapsing.